In the winter of 1609, a man named George Percy sat inside a crumbling wooden fort on the edge of the Virginia wilderness and wrote down what he was watching happen around him. He wrote about people eating their horses, then their dogs, then their cats, then the rats they could catch in the walls of the fort, then their leather boots and shoe soles, boiled down until they were soft enough to swallow. Nothing was spared to maintain life, Percy wrote, and to do those things which seem incredible, as to dig up dead corpses out of graves and to eat them. Of the 500 people living inside Jamestown Fort when that winter began, only 60 were still alive when spring finally came. 440 people, gone, in a single winter. But here is what makes this story truly extraordinary. Not just the horror of what happened inside those walls, but the fact that this colony survived at all. Because by every measure that should have mattered, Jamestown should have failed completely, permanently, and within its first year. The wrong location, the wrong season, the wrong people, no real plan, a powerful Native American empire that did not want them there, and a company of investors back in London who cared more about finding gold than feeding the people they had sent to die. This is the true story of Jamestown, America's first permanent English settlement. Not the version from the textbooks, the real one, and it is far stranger, far darker, and far more human than anything you were taught in school. Chapter 1. The Wrong Men in the Wrong Place. To understand just how badly Jamestown was set up to fail, you need to understand who actually got off those 3 ships in May of 1607. On December 20th, 1606, 3 small vessels, the Susan Constant, the Discovery, and the Godspeed, left England carrying 104 men and boys. They were sponsored by the Virginia Company of London, a private investment company that had been granted a royal charter by King James I to establish a colony in North America. The pitch to investors was simple: find gold, find a route to the Pacific, and make everyone rich. The reality that arrived in Virginia was rather different. Among the 104 colonists, the Virginia Company had sent a striking number of gentlemen, men of social rank who genuinely believed that manual labor was beneath them and who had arrived in the New World, expecting to supervise the finding of gold rather than to grow their own food. Captain John Smith, who would become the most important figure in Jamestown's early survival, later wrote with barely concealed fury that the colony's biggest problem was men who thought work was a disgrace to their rank. The location they chose made things worse. On May 14, 1607, the colonists landed on a narrow, swampy peninsula jutting into the James River, a spot chosen primarily because its deep water allowed ships to anchor close to shore, and because it seemed easy to defend against a Spanish naval attack. What it was not easy to defend against was the reality of living there. The ground was marshy and unsuitable for agriculture. The water supply was contaminated. Historians now know that the colonists' primary water source was brackish, polluted with salt water and human waste for much of the year. Modern researchers, analyzing the bones of early Jamestown colonists, have found evidence consistent with arsenic poisoning and severe dehydration. The land was also the homeland of the powerful Powhatan Confederacy, an alliance of roughly 30 Native American peoples under the paramount chief Wahunsanakak, who had watched the English arrive, immediately understood what colonization meant for his people, and had no intention of simply allowing it to happen. And there was one more problem nobody wanted to admit. They had arrived in the middle of the worst regional drought in centuries. Scientists analyzing tree rings from centuries-old Virginia trees have confirmed that 1606 to 1612 was one of the driest periods in the region in 800 years. The crops the colonists needed to grow to survive were planted in soil that could not support them. Within the first 9 months of landing, 66 of the original 104 colonists were dead, killed by contaminated water, disease, starvation, and Powhatan attacks. The colony was already on the edge of extinction before its first winter was even over. Chapter 2. The Man Who Kept It Alive. By the autumn of 1607, with the colony collapsing around him, one man had emerged as Jamestown's most essential figure. And the story of how he got there is almost as strange as everything else about this place. Captain John Smith had arrived in Virginia as a prisoner. During the 4-month voyage from England, he had been accused of mutiny by the expedition's leader, Captain Christopher Newport, and was literally in chains when the ships reached Virginia. Scheduled to be hanged upon arrival, he was saved, improbably, by a sealed letter. The Virginia Company had sent instructions that were only to be opened upon arrival in Virginia. When Newport broke the seal, he discovered that Smith had been designated as one of the colony's governing council members. You cannot hang a member of the governing council. Smith walked off the ship a free man and immediately set about trying to keep everyone else alive. Smith's approach to survival was practical, in ways that the colony's gentlemen found offensive. He instituted a rule that remains famous: "He that will not work shall not eat." In a colony full of men who considered manual labor beneath them, this was controversial. Smith did not care. More importantly, Smith understood something the other colonists did not: that the only way Jamestown survived its early years was through trade with the Powhatan. He learned enough of the Powhatan language to negotiate directly with local leaders, trading English metal tools and copper, materials the Native Americans valued enormously for desperately needed corn. In December 1607, Smith was captured while exploring the Chickahominy River, taken before the paramount chief Powhatan himself at his capital, Werowocomoco. What happened next is one of the most contested moments in early American history. Smith later claimed that Powhatan's young daughter, a girl we know as Pocahontas, though her real name was Amanute, threw herself across his body as he was about to be executed, saving his life. Historians today are divided on whether this actually happened the way Smith described, or whether it was a ritualized adoption ceremony that Smith misunderstood, or simply an encounter that he later embellished to make himself sound more heroic. What is not disputed: Smith was released, returned to Jamestown alive, and whatever relationship he had established with Powhatan resulted in a trade arrangement that kept the colony fed through its most desperate early period. Then, in the autumn of 1609, Smith was badly burned in a gunpowder accident. Some historians have speculated it may not have been entirely accidental, given how many enemies he had made within the colony, and was forced to return to England for treatment. He never came back to Virginia. With Smith gone, the fragile order he had imposed on Jamestown dissolved almost immediately. Trade with the Powhatan collapsed. The new leaders quarreled. The colony had no one who could hold it together. And the winter of 1609 was coming. Chapter 3. The Starving Time. What happened in Jamestown between the autumn of 1609 and the spring of 1610 is known to historians as the Starving Time. It is one of the darkest episodes in the entire history of English colonization, and one of the least honestly told. At the beginning of that winter, roughly 500 people were living inside Jamestown's fort. This was actually more people than usual. A fleet of 9 ships had arrived in August 1609, carrying about 400 new settlers from England. But the fleet had brought very few supplies. The new arrivals ate through the colony's entire supply of planted corn in 3 days. Simultaneously, the relationship with the Powhatan Confederacy had turned from tense to openly hostile. Chief Powhatan had ordered a complete halt to trade with the English, a decision that, without Smith to negotiate, the colony had no way to reverse. Powhatan warriors surrounded the fort, cutting off any attempt to forage or hunt in the surrounding forest. Anyone who left the walls risked being killed. The colonists were trapped inside with almost nothing to eat, as a brutal Virginia winter closed in around them. Governor George Percy's account of what followed is one of the most harrowing documents in American history. The colonists first ate their horses, 7 of them brought from England on the fleet. When the horses were gone, they ate their dogs. When the dogs were gone, they ate their cats. When the cats were gone, they ate the rats they could catch in the walls. When the rats were gone, they boiled and ate their own leather boots and shoe soles. Percy wrote that colonists who ventured outside the fort and were killed by Powhatan warriors were licked up the blood which had fallen from their weak fellows. Others dug up recently buried bodies from the colony's graveyard and ate those too. Percy wrote without apparent disbelief, "Nothing was spared to maintain life and to do those things which seem incredible, as to dig up dead corpses out of graves and to eat them." In 2012, archaeologists from Preservation, Virginia, discovered something in a trash pit inside the original Jamestown fort: human bones. The skull, lower jaw, and leg bone of a 14-year-old girl, who archaeologists named Jane. The marks on her bones told a precise forensic story. Smithsonian forensic anthropologist Douglas Owsley analyzed the cuts on Jane's skull. "The chops to the forehead are very tentative, very incomplete," he said. Then the body was turned over, and there were 4 strikes to the back of the head, one of which was the strongest and split the skull in half. The cuts were consistent with someone attempting to remove the brain and the flesh from the face, the most nutritious parts of a human body. Jane was not murdered for food. The evidence suggests she was already dead, possibly from disease or starvation, when her body was processed. But the processing itself was deliberate, careful, and, in its own terrible way, rational. People who are starving do not think the way people who are not starving think. By the time Jane's bones were being cut in that cellar, the colonists inside Jamestown Fort had stopped being the adventurers and gentlemen who had sailed from England 2 years earlier. They had become something else entirely. Of the roughly 500 people inside the fort when winter began, only 60 were still alive when spring came. 440 people, dead in a single winter. Chapter 4. The ship that arrived from Bermuda. While 440 people were dying inside Jamestown Fort, something extraordinary was happening on a small island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The 9-ship fleet that had sailed from England in June 1609, carrying 500 new settlers, had run into a catastrophic hurricane mid-Atlantic. 8 of the 9 ships made it through. The 9th, the flagship Sea Venture, carrying the colony's new governor Sir Thomas Gates and 150 passengers and crew, was driven off course and wrecked on the reefs of Bermuda. Bermuda was then completely uninhabited, but it was not unlivable. The shipwrecked survivors found fresh water, wild pigs, and abundant seabirds. While the colonists in Jamestown slowly starved to death, the passengers of the Sea Venture spent the winter of 1609 in something close to comfort, eating well, building shelters, and constructing 2 new boats from Bermuda cedar wood and salvaged timber from the wreck itself. The story of the Sea Venture's wreck and survival was so remarkable that when the passengers finally reached England, their accounts caused a sensation. One passenger, Secretary William Strachey, wrote a detailed account of the hurricane and the Bermuda survival that was circulated in London literary circles. Most historians believe William Shakespeare read Strachey's account and that it became a direct source for The Tempest, written in 1610 to 1611. The first permanent English settlement in America accidentally inspired one of Shakespeare's greatest plays. In May 1610, 10 months after the wreck, Gates and his survivors arrived at Jamestown in their 2 homemade boats. What they found was almost beyond description. The fort was falling apart. The surviving 60 colonists were so weakened by starvation that some of them died immediately after the rescue ships arrived. their bodies unable to process food after months of near-total deprivation. Gates made a decision. Jamestown was finished. He ordered the surviving colonists onto his 2 small boats and prepared to abandon the settlement entirely, sailing down the James River toward the open sea and the passage home to England. They had already left. They were already on the river. And then, in the single most improbable moment in the entire history of Jamestown, they saw a ship coming upstream toward them. It was Lord de la Warr, arriving from England with fresh supplies, 300 new colonists, and orders to make the colony work. Gates turned his boats around. The surviving colonists returned to Jamestown, America's first English colony, survived by ours. Chapter 5. What Jamestown actually built. Jamestown did not instantly become a thriving colony after Lord de la Warr's timely arrival. The years that followed were still brutal, marked by continued conflict with the Powhatan, continued disease, and continued political infighting among the colonists and their backers in London. What saved Jamestown economically, and what ultimately transformed it from a desperate survival exercise into a functioning colony, was a single plant. A colonist named John Rolfe had arrived in Virginia with the Sea Venture survivors from Bermuda. Rolfe experimented with cultivating a strain of tobacco, specifically a sweeter variety from Trinidad and Venezuela. Different from the harsh native tobacco the Powhatan grew. By 1614, Jamestown's first tobacco shipment reached London. It sold immediately. Within a decade, Virginia was exporting hundreds of thousands of pounds of tobacco a year, and the colony that had nearly destroyed itself in its first 3 winters had become the most profitable investment the Virginia Company had ever made. Rolfe is remembered by most people for something else entirely: his marriage to Pocahontas, the young Powhatan woman who may or may not have saved John Smith's life, who was captured by English colonists in 1613 as a diplomatic hostage, converted to Christianity, renamed Rebecca, and married Rolfe in 1614. Their marriage brought a period of relative peace between the English and the Powhatan Confederacy. Pocahontas traveled to England with Rolfe in 1616, was received at the English court, and became something of a celebrity in London, living proof, as far as the Virginia Company was concerned, that Native Americans could be successfully civilized. She died in England in 1617, at approximately 21 years old, before she could return to Virginia. She never saw her homeland again. The peace that her marriage had brought lasted only until 1622, when the Powhatan Confederacy launched a coordinated attack that killed roughly 400 English colonists in a single day, nearly a third of the entire colonial population of Virginia. The attack was organized by Powhatan's successor, his brother Opechancanough, who had watched the tobacco economy expand across Powhatan land year after year and finally decided that diplomacy had failed completely. The English retaliated with equal violence, and the wars between the Virginia colonists and the Powhatan people would continue, with brief interruptions, for decades. Jamestown itself was eventually abandoned as Virginia's capital in 1699, when the colonial capital moved to nearby Williamsburg. The site was largely forgotten, slowly reclaimed by the James River and the Virginia forest. Today, archaeologists at historic Jamestown are still actively excavating the original fort site. The bones of the people who died in the starving time are still being found and analyzed. Jane, the 14-year-old girl whose skull was recovered in 2012, is on display at the Smithsonian. She is the only face we can put to the 440 people who did not survive the winter of 1609. When George Percy sat in that crumbling fort in the winter of 1609 and wrote down what was happening around him, he was not writing for history. He was writing because he could not stop, because what he was witnessing was so far beyond anything he had ever been prepared for that the only way to survive it was to put it into words. The colony he was describing should not have survived. by every reasonable measure: location, leadership, supplies, timing, relations with the people already living on that land. Jamestown should have failed completely, and English America should never have begun. It survived anyway. Not because the Virginia Company planned well, not because the colonists were prepared, not because England had any real understanding of what it was asking those 104 people to do when it put them on 3 small ships and pointed them west. It survived because of individuals: a stubborn soldier who refused to let people starve without working, a Native American girl whose choices and whose suffering are still not fully understood, an accidental shipwreck that put survivors in exactly the right position at exactly the right time, and a ship that arrived on a Virginia river at the precise moment when everything was already lost. America's foundation was not built on a plan. It was built on a series of accidents and desperate decisions made by people who had no idea what they were actually doing and who survived anyway, in ways that nobody at the time could explain. That might be the most honest thing that has ever been said about it.